Hola, ¿cómo estás? Bienvenido. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're gonna learn how to mix live drums inside of FL Studio. Let's go. Before we even get started here, I have to say, if you're one of those people who goes into the comments and is like, well, actually, I went to Berklee College of Music for 12 years, and that's really not how you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to take the parallel compression and sidechain it to... You should probably click off this video now because for one, this is more of a beginner tutorial, and two, I'm just a guy who taught myself how to play and record drums. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and I've developed my own methods to get a drum sound that I'm really happy with, so hopefully by the end of this, you will be able to as well. Anyways, as you can see right here, I've got all the drum tracks laid out in front of me. I recorded these like 5 minutes ago. If you need a tutorial on how to set up your FL Studio for recording drums, watch this video here. But this video is strictly mixing, so don't expect anything else. But here's what these drums sound like with absolutely no mixing or anything done to them at all. First things first, do not be intimidated by the number of drum tracks that I have. I'm using a lot of microphones, but if you're using 3 microphones, 2 microphones, whatever you got is fine. I'm just showing you with like the most tracks possible so you can get the full scope of everything. So when you have all your drum tracks, the first thing you're gonna do is go to the channel rack actually, and then just double click one of these little rectangles. Now everything is selected. You can hit Control L, and this will assign everything to its own mixer track. You also probably should match the project tempo to whatever the tempo of the drums are, which is going to be 85. Before we put effects on anything or start EQing or doing anything else, if you have a snare top and bottom microphone, one of those, the phase needs to be flipped. This is because they're recording the same thing but from opposite angles, so the phase is going to be all weird. I usually flip the phase on the bottom one, but it's totally up to you. Just click on it, reverse polarity, and there you go. You can also do this in the mixer by clicking this button right here. I just like to do it on the actual sample. Also, color coding your mixer tracks can be very helpful, knowing like, okay, kick is the orange one, snare top is the green one, whatever, but at least just renaming them so they all have the proper names. Another thing that's probably a bit unconventional is I always like to have a soft clipper on the master track. Just click on soft clipper and literally just leave it on the default setting. This is basically just going to prevent anything from going above 0 dB, and doing so, it makes everything kind of punch a little bit harder too. So starting off with the kick drum mic, first thing I put on there is this Shep 73 mono little preamp plugin. All the plugins that I use here will be linked down in the description below as well if you want to check them out. Super simple, just go to the kick preset. I like to turn off this high pass filter, boost the mids a little bit, and also boost the high end a little bit. Now after that, we're going to add one of my favorite plugins ever, which is DBX 160. For the DBX 160, we can go to the bass drum preset. And I'm just going to dial the compression back on this a little bit. So I'm going to raise the threshold, bring down the compression to like 2.5, and then we're going to use this output gain knob to just bring that kick up a lot. And now that kick is super punchy. Also, this is a minor thing, but as far as like leveling and getting everything to sound right volume wise, you kind of always want to be making minor tweaks to these faders right here. So if it's a little loud, bring it down. If anything just sounds too loud and out of place, bring it back down. If something sounds too quiet, just bring it back up. And that's going to be constantly changing depending on the plugins you're putting on the tracks. Also, right clicking on this little green button will solo. While you have something soloed, you can left click on other tracks like this. And that's just a great feature for mixing drums. So now with the kick, what I'll do is just put a little EQ on there. Fruity parametric EQ 2. And contrary to what some people may think, you don't really want to cut out any of the high end or much of the high end of a kick drum, because if you hear, that's where a lot of that punch of the kick drum is coming from. If we have those high mids cut out completely, it's still punchy because it has that low end, but it's not punching anywhere near as much as it should be. You can probably cut out some of the high end, so maybe down to like 10K you can cut that out. And then honestly, I would add a little bit of a boost in the high mid. So another thing I might do, depending on how I'm feeling and the style I'm going for, is add a little Pultec EQ plugin. This plugin right here. Usually I'll just go with this Kick 101, and I'll bring this low boost way down because we don't really need a whole lot of more low end, but I will bring this high frequency up to like 8K and boost it a little bit. And this right here just adds a lot of slap to that kick drum. So you can add that on there if you want a more aggressive kick drum, but if not, we're pretty much good to go. So now let's move on to the snare drum, which I think is probably one of the most important parts of the drum kit. If your snare drum is not hitting right, the rest of the drums are just going to be thrown off completely, which, small sidebar, does a little bit come down to the actual drum kit and the tuning and everything, but we're not focusing on that today. Maybe I'll make another video at some point. Anyways, what we're going to do with the snare top and bottom, we're just going to control shift click on both of these. Then we're going to go to an empty mixer track, right click, route to this track only. And now these are routed to the same track, so whatever we put on this track will affect both of them, and we can call this snare bus. So again, we're going to take that Shep's 73 preamp plugin. Just going to go preset, and snare. And you can adjust this to your liking because your snare is going to sound a little bit different than mine. And of course, your entire drum kit is going to sound different. So adjust the settings to whatever your drums sound like. So now that we have that on there, we're going to compress this thing, and the world is your oyster when it comes to compressors for snare drums. Different people have different preferences for what they think sounds good on a snare. I, once again, like to use the DBX 160 plugin. Just put it on snare. I'm sure some 45-year-old engineer guy with a neck beard is going to be like,
you can't use that compressor because the attack really isn't good for snare drums. You should be using the CLA 70.
I just like the way it sounds, and if it sounds good, it is good. So once we got that, I'll do another EQ. For this one, we're just going to cut out a bunch of the low end, but also not too much low end, because if we cut out up to like here, that snare drum just sounds super thin now, so you kind of do need to leave some of those bass frequencies in there. And now we're going to actually backtrack a little bit, because once we have these effects on, we can kind of hear how both the bottom and top snare mic react to them. So to really change the sound of our snare drum, we're going to adjust how much top and bottom mic are in this mix, basically. I like to have more of the snare top microphone in there than the bottom. Snare bottom gives you that really like shiny high-end kind of stuff. And the top mic gives you that kind of like thuddy sound of the stick hitting the head of the drum. Both of those mics are very important though, because if you only have one or the other, it's not going to sound as full as a snare drum possibly could. All right, so now we can move on to the toms, which are relatively easy. We're just going to, once again, use the DBX 160, and I absolutely love this herd of toms preset. We can pretty much use the same compressor on the rack toms and the floor tom. So I'm just going to copy the preset over, and the way you do that is by left clicking and then just do save preset as, but we're going to click, hold, and drag this. Just hover over whatever mixer track you want to copy it to, and then let go, and then it'll appear inside of this one as well. And finally with these, we can just do a little EQ, take out some of those unnecessary frequencies, so really low end, and I'm going to do a little bit of a boost around the high mids as well. The floor tom is obviously deeper, so you want to focus a little bit more of the low end with your EQ, so we're going to let more of those bass frequencies be in there. But we're also going to have this high mid boost because we want that punch. Same theory as the kick drum. But now, you're presented with a choice here. So if you've ever heard a song where they do a drum fill on the toms and it's like, and it kind of like goes around your head, they basically do that with panning. Let me show you my philosophy for how to think about this. If I'm standing right here, listening to someone play the drums, when they play this tom, it's going to be slightly to my right, and when they play the floor tom, it's going to be slightly to my left. So if you want the listener to feel like they're listening to somebody playing the drums, that's kind of how you pan the toms. However, if I'm over here sitting at the drums playing them, I'm flip-flop now. So now this rack tom is to my left, and now this is to my right. So if you want the listener to be more like behind the drum set, you might arrange it that way. Or you can do it literally however you want. As long as you have some sort of panning in there, you're going to get that moving toms effect. Doing that is also going to give your drums a lot more depth, which goes perfectly with the next thing, which is the overhead microphone or phones. So it's very common to use stereo overheads, which is basically two mics that are positioned kind of in like a triangle from the drum set, where one is panned hard left and one is panned hard right, and this creates a really good stereo image of the drum kit. Also, naturally with overheads, they're going to pick up a lot of high end from the cymbals because they're right where the cymbals are. So the overheads is where a lot of people get their brightness and cymbal-ness. For this one today, I just used a single overhead mic instead of doing a whole stereo setup. But if you have stereo overheads, I'd recommend doing that routing to a bus thing that I showed you with the snare mics. Just makes it easier to mix both of those together. Anyways, on our overhead, the first thing that I'm going to do is put DBX 160 compressor. Conveniently, there's a little preset called overheads. Now I'm going to once again pull up an EQ. There's a lot of different conflating and overlapping things when it comes to room mics and overhead mics. Since both of them really capture a much fuller picture of the drum kit, we really want to focus on how we use each of these recordings. So with the overheads, what I want to do is bring out just mostly high end with those. And then with the room mic, I kind of just want that to be like pure room sound. So for that purpose, I'm going to cut out more low end from the overhead than I normally would. And I'm going to do a pretty significant boost in the high end. I think this is fine, so we can move on to the last track here, which is the room mic. So your room mic is really going to be what gives your drums a lot of their character, because nobody is recording in the exact same room as you, and every room sounds different acoustically, which I personally think is one of the really cool things about recording drums, is that everybody's going to have kind of a different sounding thing. So don't be afraid of the room mic, just embrace it. For this room mic sound, I literally just placed this microphone right here on the back of my chair, and I just hit record, and it sounds good. Anyways, DBX 160, you know the drill. Preset, room mics. Then of course, little EQ in there. You'll notice that the mixing plugins and procedure is very similar for almost every track. It's really not the most complicated thing in the world, but it just is intimidating sometimes because there's a lot of microphones and there's a lot of tracks in there. What do I do? That's why I'm here. Calm down. All right, but since we have the overhead mic providing a lot of that high end, we're going to take out some of the high end in the room mics. And you can hear that this room mic really captured a really good sound of that kick. The kick sounds very punchy, so we're going to lean into more of that low end, thicker body of this recording. All right, so this right here is one of my little secret weapons I like to use. You can kind of do this on the room mic or a mono overhead. What I'm going to do is take this reverb mono to stereo, and now we're going to adjust this to kind of whatever flavor of room sound we want. So this is a fairly big room sound. But I love this plugin because you can adjust the distance of the microphone from the sound source and the size of the room. I personally like to go with the drum room preset. And now you have some stereo depth in your drum mix without actually having to do any stereo miking, which is very nice. So right now these drums are sounding like this. If you wanted to just call it a day right here and say these are your drums, that's perfectly fine because these sound good. Alrighty, now for the fun part. So whatever effects you put on your master are going to shape really your entire drum sound. The first one that I do is going to be Kramer tape. Unless your entire mix is in mono, you want to put stereo because remember we did that thing with the room mic to where we gave it some stereo width. The preset called drum kit under drums is pretty good. I kind of have one set up already. Just boost the playback level, bring down the record level a little bit. And if you want to go more lo-fi with it, you can put the tape speed on 7.5. This plugin is kind of destroying my CPU, but that 7.5 speed basically just takes out some of the clarity in the high end, which is pretty characteristic of like the lo-fi sound. Obviously, there's a million different options for what you put on the master. One that I've been using recently is this UAD Verve Analog Essentials plugin. Just an incredibly simple plugin that gives you a nice tape saturation. Again, just demolishing my CPU, but I just use the first one for kind of a more clean tape thing, and then I use this warm one for more of like a lo-fi thing. Sometimes I'll also put DBX 160 on there or maybe CLA 76, usually if I want something to just compress everything, glue everything together a bit better. But you can also put literally any plugin you want on there. Feel free to put RC20, put some Bit Crusher on there, put a phaser on there if you want. Whatever floats your boat, just experiment, just make your drums sound how you want them to sound. So yeah, honestly, that is pretty much gonna do it for me in this one here today. Hopefully you now know how to mix your own or maybe somebody else's live drums inside of FL Studio. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything of that nature down below. Also, linked below is my super cool indie drum pack, which contains like 40 plus live recorded drum loops, just in case you don't really want to bother with mixing drums at all. I got you. But nonetheless, thank you guys for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all next time.